Hello, this is Mark Shenton, welcoming you to Theatre Voice's latest monthly critical roundup, sponsored by Palgrave Macmillan, and today being offered on video too, so you can see us as well as hear us, which may be a mixed blessing. I'm joined by regular panellists Charles Spencer of the Daily Telegraph, Matt Wolfe of the International Herald Tribune, and David Benedict of Variety to discuss Mike Leigh's new play, Grief. These days, of course, Mike Leigh is best known for films that include Naked, Secret and Lies, Vera Drake, Topsy-Turvy and Life is Sweet, but the RADA-trained writer and director actually began his career in the theatre and returns to it from time to time. Earlier this year, he returned to restage his 1979 play Ecstasy at Hampstead Theatre, where the original production has also been done, which subsequently transferred briefly to the West End's Duchess Theatre. Now he's also back at the National, where in 2005 he staged 2000 Years, with a new play called Grief, a muted family drama set in 50s suburbia revolving around a widowed woman who lives with her brother and 15-year-old daughter. Until a week before the play opened, the National didn't have a title for it, and it was merely being referred to on publicity materials as a new Mike Leigh play, but it sold out in advance anyway. Charlie, was that deserved, that it sold out in advance, sight unseen?
Oh, I think so. I mean, just with Mike Leigh, I think his work is so outstanding by and large. I mean, he's the great sort of British film auteur, I would say. I mean, he's the only one of the very few British directors I'll go and see the work of as a matter of course. And even when he's not very good, he's always interesting. And I found this play superb, I must say. It's meticulously in the 50s period, which I can just about remember. And that sort of sense of boredom and nothing to do and not having a telly in the house and that sort of very polite way of talking to each other and never talking about anything serious, and beautifully done. And then suddenly in the second half you get a real wham-bam surprise, and the play in the final minutes turns completely dark, as it so often does. It is quite funny. I have to say that I found by the end, I found it almost unbearable, and it left me feeling depressed for about 48 hours afterwards. I felt sort of tainted by it, which is a tribute to him, I think. I mean, he wasn't trying to do a feel-good evening, and I found it extraordinarily effective.
You just said second half. Of course, it is done in one continuous stream. It's very much a slow burner, isn't it, David? Not a lot happens, in fact, for much of it.
Not a lot happens for far too much of it in my book. I'm afraid, unlike Charlie, I was completely not sold on this. For the first 20 minutes, I thought it was outstanding. As Charlie says, it's meticulously observed. The period is extremely finely caught. Alison Chitty's faded colours on her set and in the costumes tell you everything you need to know. It then goes on to repeat. I sat there going, yes, I understand that once again Mike Leigh, a middle-class man himself, is lambasting the middle class all over again, and he's telling us that nothing happened and it was very repressive in the 1950s. Oh, really? It's not exactly news. And he overloads his case. The dice are loaded. It seems to me, you know, nothing happens, there's no telly to watch, and no radio? Every single house virtually in the country must have had a radio in the 1950s, but it suits his purposes that there's no radio, so they sit in silence, looking at each other, or not looking at each other.
And singing songs occasionally.
Singing songs occasionally. I mean, there are something like between 22 and 25 scenes, most of which are identical. It's a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. It makes its case, which is very sad, quite early on, and then goes on to repeat. Beautifully acted by the entire cast, but to no dramatic end. I think Mike Leigh is in love with his method and not with delivering a play.
Manville is extraordinary, Matt.
Leslie's very good, although actually in a funny way I thought it took her a very long time in this play to come into her own, although she is very good, and there's a kind of chipperness about her that you see crumbling in front of your eyes, even the way she repeatedly refers to her daughter as darling, and by the end of the play, the central dynamic being the mother and this deeply damaged, sullen, indrawn daughter. By the end of the play, the word darling seems to mean something entirely different. But there's a whole host of kind of comic turns which are quite funny and also by the end of the play quite chilling. These two women, Marion Bailey and Wendy Nottingham, playing the godparents to the daughter, who are particularly the Marion Bailey one, who's this sort of garrulous chatterbox who talks endlessly and doesn't ever listen to a single thing that anyone in her midst happens to say. And a brilliant turn from David Horowitz, playing a kind of terrifyingly avuncular doctor who talks about running off to sciatica and Strawberry Hill. I think I'm kind of in between both Charlie and David. I think it's certainly not ecstasy as far as theatrical value goes, which I thought was extraordinary and was of course revived earlier this year. But it does have a kind of pressure cooker sense of implosion about it. And I'm surprised that Charlie said, this walloping surprise, because I think in a way what it's about actually is tracking the inevitability of it. That with a play called Grief, it only can end one particular way, and that's the way it ends. And you're sort of watching gradations on the road to a sort of dreadful loss and disbelief.
But it's interesting how you just said that Grief, with a play like called Grief, that's going to happen. Of course, he resisted renaming it until the 11th hour.
The other thing about
presumably because that would have given the game away, as you've identified.
No, but the other thing is that the grief, of course, is that her husband died in the war, and that's what you take as the grief, and which she's never quite got over. I can only say that it wasn't a play I felt prepared to nitpick with. I was absolutely hooked as it went on, and it was remorseless, and I think you do have to, you have to give some time over to it. But I can only say that nothing else has affected me as much this year as that play. It really did, and it brought back so much of my own memories, and the acting I thought was superlatively good.
They're just a tiny bit obvious, and you sort of want to give it a kick. For instance, Leigh and her older brother, beautifully played by Sam Kelly, they do sort of have this sort of refrain of various duets, and one of them is the song Smile, Smile Though Your Heart Is Aching, and you think, yes, we've sort of got that. And then there's a point towards the end when Leigh Manville very pointedly doesn't join in the duet, so that's an index that things are really beginning to fall away. The opening scene where the Leigh Manville character is hiring this incredible scold of a maid who seems just terrifying to me. I would have got rid of the maid after 10 minutes. But she's just there to sort of provide exposition so that we know what happened.
Absolutely.
So that they can comment about, oh, that was my late husband, blah, blah. It's a little bit bald. You feel like Terence Rattigan, to whom this play owes a lot, would somehow have finessed it better. But the acting is so brilliant that,
I mean, I think the problem is that Mike Leigh is an actor, as you say. He trained at Rudd. He is an actor, and he produces very actorly work, which is great for those involved. And if you want to watch the detail, there's a ton there to be gleaned. But the problem is that I don't think it's certainly in this case that he writes very good drama. He gets actors who do very, very anecdotal stuff. Actors are terribly good at being actors, if you're lucky. They're less good at being writers. Leigh Manville has a line quite early on where she goes, "Ooh, there's my cup of Born Vita." And you go, yes, I know you've done your research into what people were drinking at night in 1957. A better writer wouldn't have done it, and a better writer would have given you boredom. You can do boredom very, very quickly. You can do repression very, very quickly. And you can ally that to a developing plot that really takes you somewhere. As Matt says, it owes an enormous amount to Terence Rattigan, who gives you all of that and a whole deal more. This just relentlessly harps onto the same theme, which you can sort of anticipate 5 minutes into the play.